Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, as that will help grow my channel. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd appreciate that as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave those and I will respond. Again, thank you. If you watched my roughing out video about 2 months ago, you'll recognize these pieces of wood. I have 4 pieces of maple here that I'm going to make production bowls out of, meaning that the bowls are going to be all the same. So it's going to be a set of 4 bowls. So I'm going to be doing 4 bowls in this video. Let's start with the first one. I'm going to go ahead and mount this on my lathe. And when I mount it, I have 2 options basically. I can use a wood worm screw, which I show here, or I can use a faceplate, which I'll show later. So here I've drilled a hole in my blank, and I just hold that up against the worm screw and let it screw itself on. It makes for a dramatic way to mount the piece. Here I'm able to turn it up to 300 RPM, which is pretty good. It's a fairly balanced piece, but I'll still bring the tailstock up just for some extra security. Whenever possible, I try and turn the outside, the bottom of the bowl first, here removing the bark. I'm using my tailstock, as you can see, and I just tightened it up a little bit. But I do notice now, while watching the video, that it's backing off just from the vibration. It's a good idea to always check this and make sure that that's tight. Now, you will notice the black lever on the side. I should have tightened that up, which would prevent the tailstock from accidentally backing off. This video is a production set where I'm turning 4 bowls, and I know now that as I pieced it together, I do mix up some bowls at different times. Here I'm continuing to work on the outside of a bowl, but I see the tailstock is not engaged. So I mentioned earlier there's 2 ways to mount it, either with a wood worm screw or a faceplate. I know this is on a faceplate because I would never trust a wood worm screw to hold without the tailstock engaged. Here you can see the outside of the bowl is finished, and I've reverse chucked it so that I can start working on the inside. So the first thing I do as I work on the inside, I just use my carbide tool just to establish the rim. With that done, I bring the tailstock back up. This time you can see once I tighten it, I use that lever which will lock the tailstock in place so it doesn't back off. Here I've switched to my bowl gouge, and I just want to point out that the bowl gouge, without exception, is the quickest way to remove a lot of material. Here I'm switching back to my carbide just as I work the very center. Sometimes it's difficult to get the bowl gouge in right to the center. The reason I keep the tailstock engaged as long as possible is because when the bowl is heavy, that puts a lot of stress on the tenon on the bottom. But once I've removed a lot of material from the inside and the bowl is a lot lighter, I can remove that tailstock because the tenon should hold it into place. And now at this point, I'm just removing that center nub where the tailstock was engaged. So here I'm using a gauge that I have to be able to measure the thickness of the bottom of the bowl, as well as caliper gauges. That initial gauge is just a board with a dowel that'll slide back and forth, so I can put it up against the rim, push the dowel in, and then hold that up against the outside for comparison to see how deep it is. Sometimes it's hard to get the caliper gauges right to the bottom. Now, even with all the precautions I took, lightening the bowl up before removing this tailstock, I did end up having a catch near the bottom, and I did end up breaking the tenon off the bottom of this bowl, which I'll repair in a moment. So because I broke the tenon off of this, I'm going to do up a glue block. I have that here. You see, it's just a flat piece of wood that I have a tenon turned on, which will fit inside my chuck, and I can grab it there. That's going to be glued onto the bottom of the bowl where the tenon broke. So all I have here is glue sticks, which I melt. Oh, I should also mention I put some 2 rings inside here just to give me a little bit more surface area. I'm going to dip this in the glue that I've got on the stove and melting. And you want to make sure, these are just glue sticks that I bought at Canadian Tire, I believe. And you want to make sure that you've got 100% coverage on that glue block and that you've got lots and lots of glue. And then you just set it on here. Now I want to get that centered as much as I can. And I'll just press that down. And I just measured this with a gauge, just make sure that I'm centered all the way around. That looks good. I'll let that cool. I'll let this cool for about 20 minutes, and then that'll be safe to turn. Again, I'm going to turn the foot on this eventually down here, so that'll be coming off anyway, so that's not a problem. But now this gives me something to be able to finish the inside with. So once I mount the bowl back on the lathe with the glue block that I put on it, I just true up the outside in case it shifted a little bit. But it didn't have to take off much. It didn't move very much from its original position, so it didn't take long to round it back up. Now I'll just take my time and remove the center nub that was there from the tailstock. I mentioned this earlier, there's 2 ways to mount a bowl. This is bowl number 3, and I've mounted it on a faceplate rather than the worm screw. Also, being a production run on these bowls, you can see here that I've made a template, and I'm using that to gauge whether or not this bowl is the same shape as previous ones. So now we have 2 bowls that are the same shape. This one over here looks a little higher. It's not. It's just because it's sitting on that tenon that I made. They're actually the same height and same diameter. And they're about 3/4 of an inch thick, so I'll just let them dry. Now my options are I can either let them dry naturally, which will take about 6 to 8 months, or I can put them in my kiln and have them dry in about 2 weeks. I think I'm going to go with that option. Okay, it's all roughed out, and as I mentioned, this is a production set. The customer wanted 4. I made an executive decision. This one's going to be, these 2, the next 2 are going to be bigger than the first 2. Just because I had enough wood, it seemed like a shame to cut them down. So I'm going to make 2 the same, 2 more the same shape, but just slightly larger. So they'll be about as deep, just a bit bigger in diameter. So I hollowed this out, shaped the outside, hollowed the inside out in about a half an hour. So I do have a bit of a crack right here. There's a bit of pith included here and here. So I'm going to put some glue on that before I start drying it up so that doesn't spread any worse. But this is ready to go in the dryer. And again, these will dry for a month or so. And then we'll see from there. So here are the 4 bowls, 2 at 8 inches and 2 at 10 inches. They're still wet. When I finished turning them, they were about 25% moisture. So then I put them into my kiln. Now, there was a lot of numbers I was throwing around about moisture and how long it would take to dry. Once I put them in my kiln, after about 4 days, the moisture was down to 10%. So I'm going to stop at this point and I'll finish turning them. And that will be the subject of another video.